Welcome to Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Jim Walker, the Director of Public Sector Marketing for UiPath. Jim, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks.
Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. Few technologies over the last 20 years have gotten as much attention and created as much, we'll call it early value, as robotics process automation. Agencies ranging from NASA to GSA to Bureau of Fiscal Service to the Defense Logistics Agency have implemented bots and expect to save tens of millions of dollars in the coming years. And the excitement and thirst for this technology is being driven by the President's management agenda's goal of moving federal employees from low value to high value work. The Trump administration believes technologies like RPA is part of that answer. Now, this is because agencies have found success in using RPA to tackle repetitive, menial tasks like copying and pasting text into forms. In fact, Deloitte's Center for Government Insights said in 2017 that RPA could save agencies as much as $41.1 billion over the next 7 years. But with like any technology, there are challenges to overcome and potholes to avoid. Some estimate that as much as 50% of all RPA projects fail because organizations automate bad processes, or because the bot is an add-on and not a long-term approach, or because the RPA tool isn't reviewed and improved to make sure it's meeting the agency's goals. So how can agencies take advantage of this exciting new technology, save money, improve business processes, and move employees to higher value work? Well, that's where our guest comes in, Jim Walker, the Director of Public Sector Marketing for UiPath. So people hear bots, people hear robotics process automation. Let's define really what that means, because so people aren't confused that it's the robot taking your job.
That's right. It's just a software application that's running on your computer, but it's built for finance people. Like, for example, the GSA, they retrain some of their own staff, and they have developed their own internal bots now and are out using those bots. But it's not a piece of machinery that sits next to the desk and does something for a person. It's a software application that's running.
And then let's dig just a little bit deeper. That software, you're basically telling it what to do. I need you to take from column A, put it in column B, and then calculate into column C, and do it over and over and over again, versus Jim Walker, the financial analyst, having to copy, paste, calculate.
Exactly right. So some people would want to say that it's a software and you're developing and all that. I would prefer to use the phrase training. You train the bot to do what your person does, or your people. If you're the Veterans Administration and you have 900 people that do the same claims recovery every day, and you automate 50% of that activity for them, well, that afternoon, if that's working, you've doubled the capacity of the VA to work on those backlogged activities, because they are now working in conjunction with their bot, their personal intern, if you will, doing those repetitive tasks that nobody's upset about not having to do.
And I think that's the key here, and that's why there is so much excitement around it, is because people have said, well, I've done this for so long, you know, if I would give up anything, I don't have to copy and paste anymore, or as you said, I can get through this backlog more quickly. Is that why you think this is caught on? Because one, it's easy to understand, and two, it's really taking things away from people that they don't want to do anyways.
Absolutely. I would use the phrase, instead of low value and high value, I would call it necessary work. All of the work that a clerk does to get a file ready to be adjudicated for a payment back to a veteran, or for some type of manifest at one of our logistics agencies, you have to do that work. It's necessary to get to the more meaningful, let's call that high value work, that meaningful work that says, I'm doing analysis on a report. I'm sitting in a meeting talking about a new policy, and I don't have to worry about the backlog of work that's piling up at my desk, because my bot is sitting there doing that work for me.
Now, one thing about RPA and bots is there's this fear of them, right? Like, well, what does it really mean for me? I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've been doing this job for 20 years. What's it mean for me? And I think you started to go down that path a little bit when you talk about don't talk high value or low value, but necessary work. Are you seeing agencies recognize, and that's why bots are becoming more popular, becoming something that's more easily accepted? Because I mean, you've been in this a long time. We've talked about different technologies for years, and people go, well, I don't know about that, or well, I'm not sure about that. But for RPA, at least from my perspective, they've seemed to jump in much cleaner, you know, both feet and down waist deep, and let's get going.
Right. So there's always a fear of the change that's coming into a work environment. And yet when you think about it, all we've ever had in a work environment is change, right? We don't have the Navy, the U.S. Navy doesn't float around with big masts and ships anymore, right? Columbus floated over on a 97-foot ship. An aircraft carries over 1,000 feet now, 5,000 people versus 50. All kinds of technology on that ship. When we learned how to get out of sailing and how to self-propel a ship, we didn't lose anything, we gained. And I think you would find over time, we got rid of telephone operators. Sure we did. And now we have all kinds of people that are not only in the phone industry, but they're in the side issues of that, of making new phone cases and new cup holders for your phone, all kinds of new things that can be developed. But if it's your job today, you understandably are saying, well, where am I in that?
Let's talk about some of the benefits of RPA. It's catching on. I brought up the high level cost savings and moving people to better value work, but those are the obvious ones. Maybe talk me through some of the maybe less obvious ones that are beneficial.
Yeah, take an Army Aviation Depot. They are processing helicopters every day, taking them apart, putting them together, inspecting the parts, and refurbishing that helicopter. If you could refurbish that helicopter in half of the time that you're doing it today, it would be better for the Army. There would be more aircraft out doing Army activities and mission support. What we see is in logistics places is the staff spend most of their day checking for a part. And if the part's not on hand, they're ordering the part. And if that part's not in the supply room, they've got to then order it downrange. Why not just tell the bot, here are the parts that I need. If they're on hand, order them and bring them to us. If they're not, tell the supply guy I need more. If not, automatically order when you get below a certain threshold. And so then the person who is sitting there looking at a part has a lot of time to look at that part and say, serviceable or not serviceable.
Now, that's a great example because a lot of people don't think about that longer term benefit. It's like the refrigerator that we always talk about, these smart refrigerators, the IoT devices that will tell you, order your milk from Amazon or something when you're out of milk. I mean, it's that same concept. Is they know exactly the piece of software if you are using electronic inventory and that inventory says 5 and now it's down to 2 or 1, the bot can be told automatically, go order a new one or go order 5 more. And that way you always kind of have that cycle going versus, oh, Jim, I forgot to tell you to order that new part. All right, we'll get it in a week. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the discussion. How do you kind of explain that to the users? Like, is that an easy explanation?
Yeah, so thus far, the folks that we deal with at a DLA or at a NASA Shared Services Center, they actually will talk about the fact that they have a backlog from their staff asking for something of that necessary work to be automated for them. Because they would prefer to get into that. I mean, think if you're at a hospital, the Veterans Administration has a really innovative team out in Nebraska at one of the hospitals, not in their IT shop, not in their think tanks and CTOs, but just a person who saw robotics. And he said, I have a problem. Congress is passed the legislation that allowed veterans to go downtown. And so veterans are going downtown and getting their service faster when it's not available. But the unintended consequences are the doctors are putting the files in a file, mailing it back to the VA. So the chief of staff at that hospital says, I have a 96-inch stack of paper every day that we have to scan and electronically file. And we did a proof of concept, so I wouldn't argue that this proof of concept has a lot of security around it yet. But in 2 days, we built a bot that when the file comes in and gets scanned by a person, the bot then begins to electronically store that information. And you say, well, that's great, that's interesting. It's better than interesting. That means that veteran who comes back in a week later and his paper's not stuck in that 96 inches doesn't have a doctor say, you don't have your last report, I can't see you. And the doctor's not wasting his or her time saying, if it's not here, I've wasted 15 minutes waiting on you. And so a doctor overall, they may be able to see another 2 patients a week. Right. All because of RPA taking away that necessary work and just allowing people to do that person-to-person activity.
It'd be really great if somehow the bot could scan the documents too. But then we get into that robot thing and people get all freaky out about exactly. Talk maybe a little bit about the the state of RPA today. Like when you talk to agencies, I know there's a lot of interest. A lot of people are talking about it. There's a lot of good use cases out there. GSA, DLA is two of them that I can think of. NASA is one, your former home agency. But where are we more generally? Is it still in that hype curve, or are we out of the hype curve?
Well, I would argue that the administration's doing everything they can to help you get it out of the hype curve. The president recently signed his executive order for the American Artificial Intelligence Initiative that says do more R&D. You know, nothing better than to get that. And someone said, well, it's an unfunded mandate. Not if you use your RPA to generate some savings and start letting those savings generate additional artificial intelligence work. The federal CIO, Suzette Kent, is doing a magnificent job. She announced last fall that she's going to have an RPA type academy where she wants to retrain non-technical people to be prepared to work in and around the robotics environment. You know, usually government is 5 years behind on policy. And right now, they're making a really good stab at staying right up in current. As far as agencies, probably 25 agencies are using it now, 30, somewhere in there. They're all starting to see returns on investments. But I would almost contend that we ought to declare 2018 as the year of pilots, and that agencies ought to be asked, where's that $500,000 savings? Where's that $2 million savings that you can get if you automate that necessary work and free people up?
And it's interesting you bring up OMB. I know one of the things that Suzette Kent mentioned recently, I think December timeframe, as she kind of looked back at 2018 and looked forward to 2019, was a policy on robotics process automation. Now, I haven't seen a copy. I guess you probably haven't either yet? All right. Well, I was hoping for a little news here. I was hoping you'd tell us what it's about. But I think that's a recognition, if nothing else, that some government-wide standards, some government-wide understanding of what bots are. Do they need PIP cards, right? I know your old agency, NASA, had that challenge, and they ended up getting, identity management cards, smart ID cards for their robot. And I think that type of thing is what will be addressed in the policy. I think those are some of the unanswered questions.
Right. And it does... The thing I like about the 25, 30 agencies that have done something is they said we don't have to wait for perfection. If you're automating within your own network, the whole credentials outside the network's not nearly as critical. It still requires a waiver from a security perspective, but there's a lot of automation you can do just inside your building while you're waiting to figure out a better model. And some of these, the NASA with the PIP Card thing was a great thing because it allowed us to move forward. The Defense Logistics Agencies using some hardware. So there's this whole think tank of activities out there versus everyone just sitting waiting for the right solution.
You bring up an interesting point about a lot of automation within the agency. Is that where most of these pilots, most of these efforts are right now versus outside the agency somehow? For if I'm a customer who comes in and requests something that is maybe not as automated?
Yeah, one thing that we're seeing is, so I sit there and automate a process, and I have to reach across to another agency for data. That's where the stumbling block is, because the other agency is like, well, we don't want a bot in our stuff. Now, the fact that their people do that exact same work, they still don't want to let a bot do that. And to their credit, if a bot gets in there and does it 100,000 times in 15 minutes, it could create a denial of service. But part of the effort that you do with the bot is you figure out how to throttle it to make sure that, check and see if that system is busy right now. If it is, reschedule yourself, because you don't want to get in there and create a problem for that system.
Right. I definitely want to go into the challenges of robotics process automation. Before I do that, I want to also go back to something else you said. Let's declare 2018 the year of the pilot, and let's move on. Did you get a sense that so many pilots happened over the last year and a half, that agencies have a good understanding of what this technology is, what it can do, and most importantly, as I said, where to apply it smartly?
I definitely think they figured out it's going to run securely on their networks, and it's not going to go off and do its own thing. I heard that over and over, and I'm like...
it's going to take over my network.
Right. It has no way to not do what it's told to do. Now, if you don't test it, well, but you test your other software today, and you look for all types of different anomalies. So if you test it right, it's proven out that it's going to run securely on government networks. And so it is an opportunity to finally sit down and say, let's don't save $50. Let's really find and save dollars for the agency that, in the case of the AAII executive order, we can repurpose dollars into doing even more with artificial intelligence and bringing it into the system.
All right, very good. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will jump into those potholes a little bit and tell people what to avoid. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.